You're in the middle of a difficult conversation. The words are getting sharper, the tension is rising, and then it happens. The person you're talking to, or maybe it's you, just goes quiet. Not an angry quiet, but an empty one. A steel wall seems to come down behind their eyes, and all communication just stops. Does this feel familiar? It's a strange and sudden silence, almost like a system overload where all non-essential functions are brought to a halt. From the outside, it can look like a cold shoulder, but on the inside, it's a full system emergency. A little dialog box pops up in your mind that reads, communication.exe has stopped responding. You can see their mouth moving, but the audio drivers have crashed. You're physically present, but emotionally you're completely offline, and that's often when the guilt starts to creep in. But here's the critical piece of information that can reframe that guilt entirely. This response isn't you being cold, uncaring, or difficult. It's a sign of a system under immense pressure. There's a hidden neurological reason your brain does this, and understanding it is the key to self-compassion. We have to look at our most basic survival instincts. When our brain perceives a threat, it doesn't have time for nuance. It defaults to a very old, very simple menu of options: fight, flight, or the one we so often forget, freeze. That feeling of going completely silent isn't you being difficult. It's a modern social version of that primitive freeze response. It's an involuntary physiological state, not a conscious choice, where your nervous system slams on the brakes to prevent what it perceives as further injury. This isn't just going quiet. It's a profound neurological event. So let's put a name to this experience: the emotional shutdown. It's the moment where the mind's capacity to process and communicate has been completely exhausted. And as it turns out, there's a precise clinical term for this state of overload. It was coined by the renowned psychologist Dr. John Gottman. He calls this state emotional flooding. It's the scientific name for that feeling of being so completely overwhelmed by emotion that your capacity for rational thought is short-circuited. And his research didn't just give this feeling a name, it gave us a way to actually measure it. His research found a clear physiological marker, a heart rate that climbs above 100 beats per minute. Once you cross that line, you are flooded. Trying to have a rational conversation in that state is like trying to solve a complex puzzle while a fire alarm is blaring. Your body is in a state of emergency, and all higher-level thinking is offline. So what exactly is pulling that alarm? That alarm is your amygdala, the brain's ancient threat detection system. During what's called an amygdala hijack, it treats a severe emotional wound with the same life-or-death urgency as a physical attack. It floods your system with stress hormones, taking your rational brain completely offline. The entire system is now overloaded, and to prevent catastrophic failure, your brain is about to flip a very important switch. That switch is a circuit breaker. Think of your emotional capacity as the wiring in a house. A normal conversation is a gentle current of electricity. But during emotional flooding, the voltage surges to a dangerous level. The shutdown isn't the system breaking, it's the circuit breaker tripping. It intentionally cuts the power to prevent an electrical fire, a devastating outburst that could burn everything down. The silence isn't emptiness, it's an emergency safety measure. But what's actually happening in the dark right after the power goes out? Because here's the secret texture of that shutdown. The silence you see on the outside is a total illusion. Inside, it's often the loudest, most chaotic place in the room. A relentless loop of the last hurtful phrase, played over and over. It's a frantic search for an escape route, a desperate analysis of what just went wrong. Your brain isn't empty. It's running a high-stakes diagnostic, scanning for emotional damage and calculating future threats. This intense internal monologue, a process of deep rumination, consumes every available cognitive resource, leaving absolutely nothing for the outside world. And this isn't just a feeling, it's a documented psychological phenomenon. In fact, studies on rumination, often published in journals by the American Psychological Association, detail precisely how our brains can get trapped in these negative feedback loops during emotional distress. This isn't passive thinking, it's a high-energy cognitive state, and running this intense internal program consumes a massive amount of your brain's available processing power. There are simply no resources left to formulate a sentence, read social cues, or manage a conversation. It's like trying to have a smooth video call while your computer is busy rendering a massive file in the background. The system is fully occupied, and this changes everything because it means the shutdown isn't an attack, it's an act of self-preservation. This isn't a weapon you're using against them, it's a shield your nervous system deploys to protect you. But from the other side, that shield can look a lot like a wall. And we have to honor that perspective, because for the person on the other side of that wall, the experience is one of sudden, painful abandonment. Their feelings of being punished or intentionally ignored are completely real. It's a profound and tragic misunderstanding where one person's act of self-preservation is received as another person's act of rejection. And this is where we hear that painful question, why can't you just talk to me? It's a fair question, but it's like asking someone in the middle of a panic attack to just be reasonable.
The system is physiologically offline for that task. The shutdown isn't a choice to punish, it's a desperate, non-negotiable need for survival.
Which is why we have to debunk one of the most damaging myths about what that silence actually means. The most common myth is that silence is a form of agreement, or worse, indifference, but the shutdown is not a deliberate choice. It's an involuntary pause button hit by the nervous system, and the sensitivity of that button often comes down to the unique way our brains store emotional memories. For some of us, emotional memories aren't just files, they are etched into our neurology with incredible intensity. A new emotional wound doesn't just hurt on its own, it acts like a key, unlocking an entire library of past hurts. This amplification is why the circuit breaker trips so easily. In fact, this response is often the signature of a highly sensitive and empathetic nervous system. It's the architecture of a mind that processes emotional data with profound seriousness. This isn't a flaw, it's the texture of a deep internal world. And while it can feel like a liability, this very mechanism often serves a hidden, protective purpose. And that protective purpose is often a form of damage control. In that moment of absolute overload, the brain seems to know that any words spoken would be weapons, potentially irreparable ones. The shutdown becomes a painful, involuntary quarantine designed to contain the fallout. It sacrifices connection in the present to prevent catastrophic damage to the future. But understanding why this architecture exists is very different from knowing how to manage it when the power goes out. So this understanding isn't a free pass. It's a blueprint. The crucial question then is not how to prevent the shutdown, but how to communicate it with compassion when it arrives. The most effective tool is a pre-agreed verbal cue, something as simple as, my circuit breaker just tripped, I need 20 minutes. This isn't an escape, it's a request for a physiological reset, honoring the research from the Gottman Institute. It translates an internal emergency into an external, actionable request for space. But to even say those words, you first have to confront the inner critic that tells you you're broken for needing them in the first place. So let's speak directly to that inner critic, the voice that insists you're broken, cold, or just difficult. That story is fundamentally wrong. It's a complete misreading of your own biology. This isn't a character flaw. It's the signature of a deeply responsive nervous system doing its job. And this protective part of you deserves compassion, not condemnation. The depth with which you feel is a gift, and this shutdown is simply the texture of that gift. This isn't a bug in your programming. It's a core feature of your unique emotional architecture. You aren't broken. You are simply built for depth. And once we can finally accept our architecture, a far more interesting question begins to surface. So what if the true challenge was never to eliminate the silence? What if instead it was to learn how to communicate the need for it with grace and with a shared compassion for the profound reason it exists? After seeing this shutdown is a protective feature, not a flaw, what's a compassionate verbal cue you could use when your circuit breaker trips? Tell me in the comments. That external silence is just one side of the story. In our next video, we explore the internal arguments in your head that never stop. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Like this if you understand, and share with someone who needs to know they aren't broken.